Today, we are tackling one of the biggest questions out there, a question that has literally shaped the world we live in. We're going to dive into the minds of some of the most brilliant thinkers who tried to answer it and crack the code of economic growth. So let's just start with the big one. What makes a country rich? I mean, it seems like such a simple question, right? But why does one nation seem to thrive while another just struggles? This single question has been the ultimate puzzle for economists for centuries. Is it about having natural resources, a brilliant population, amazing ideas, or is it something else entirely? So here's our roadmap. We'll start with that initial quest for wealth, then check out the classical recipe. From there, we'll get into the huge debate over capitalism, map out the path to modernity, and wrap it all up with some lessons from the giants. Let's jump in. Okay, so our story really kicks off with the founding fathers of economics. These were the thinkers who first tried to systematically break down what a nation's wealth is actually made of, the basic ingredients. This table really lays out the foundational building blocks. First up, you've got Adam Smith, who basically said that wealth comes from specialization, the division of labor, and having the capital to make it happen. But then you have Malthus, who throws a huge wrench in the works, worrying that population growth would outstrip our resources. And then there's David Ricardo. He focused on how profits get reinvested, but he warned that with something finite, like land, you eventually hit a point of diminishing returns. These three really set the stage for pretty much every economic debate that followed. And this right here perfectly captures Malthus's big worry. He saw population exploding, growing geometrically, like 1, 2, 4, 8. But our ability to produce food, he thought that could only grow arithmetically, 1, 2, 3, 4. So what happens? You end up in a trap where any progress is immediately consumed by more people, keeping everyone stuck at a basic subsistence level. Now, he didn't foresee the power of technology, but his core idea still pops up in debates about resource scarcity today. A pretty grim outlook, huh? So the classical guys laid the groundwork, but the next wave of thinkers didn't just see capitalism as a system. They saw it as this incredibly dynamic and maybe even explosive force. The big question became, is this thing an engine for unlimited progress, or is it a time bomb just waiting to go off? And here we have two completely polar opposite views. On one side, you've got Joseph Schumpeter. He saw capitalism as a whirlwind of constant positive change, all powered by the daring innovator. And on the other side, Karl Marx, who saw the very same system as being built on a foundation of conflict and exploitation. Two thinkers, one system, two totally different conclusions. So to really get Schumpeter, you have to understand his concept of the circular flow. Picture an economy that's basically on autopilot. Everything is stable, repetitive, predictable, demand and supply are perfectly balanced, and because prices just equal costs, there are no real profits to be made. For Schumpeter, this boring, static world is just the starting point. So how does anything actually change? It all starts when an entrepreneur comes along and just smashes that peaceful circular flow. They introduce a game-changing innovation, a new product, a new way of doing things, and they fund it with credit. This disruption is what creates profits. But here's the catch. Those profits only last until everyone else catches on and copies the idea. Then the profits vanish and the economy settles into a new, better normal. This constant cycle of the new obliterating the old is what Schumpeter famously called creative destruction. You see it happening all the time, especially in tech. Okay, now let's do a complete 180 and look at things from a radically different angle. For Karl Marx, the whole story of capitalism begins and ends with this one core idea. All economic value, everything, is created by human labor, period. And that leads us to his most critical concept, surplus value. Here's how he breaks it down. The value of any product is made of three parts. You've got C for the machines and materials, V for the wages paid to workers, and S for surplus. Now, Marx's big argument is that capitalists pay workers just enough to get by. That's V, but the workers actually produce way more value than that. That leftover difference, the S, is the surplus value, the profit, that Marx says is unfairly captured by the capitalist. And the endgame of this system, according to Marx, is, well, not good. He argued this relentless push to maximize surplus value would lead capitalists to replace people with machines, creating what he called an industrial reserve army of unemployed people. He believed this, along with other built-in problems, would cause profits to fall over time and ultimately lead to the self-destruction of the entire capitalist system. Okay, so after World War II, the whole focus of economics started to shift. People moved away from these grand theories about capitalism's ultimate fate and started asking more practical questions, like how can developing countries actually catch up? Economists began drawing up literal blueprints for growth, roadmaps to get from poverty to prosperity. One of the most famous of these blueprints is W. Rostow's Stages of Growth. He really saw development as a linear journey, kind of like an airplane on a runway. You start in a traditional society. Then you build the preconditions for takeoff. The takeoff itself is this short, intense burst of industrial growth. From there, you hit the drive to maturity, and finally, you arrive at the age of high mass consumption. For him, it was a clear, step-by-step path that every country would follow. Now, another huge model came from Arthur Lewis, and he focused on the actual structure of the economy. He started with this picture of a typical underdeveloped nation, where almost everyone works on farms. And here's the crucial insight. There's a surplus of labor. There are so many people working the land that if you took one person away, the total harvest wouldn't even change. Their marginal productivity is basically zero. So, what do you do with all those extra workers? You move them to the factory. The new industrial sector can hire them for a low wage. But because their productivity in the factory is way higher than their wage, the factory owners make big profits. And here's the engine of growth. They take those profits and reinvest them to build more factories, which then hire more surplus workers from the farms. It creates this amazing, virtuous cycle of development. It's a model that almost perfectly describes what happened in places like South Korea and China. And this idea was so powerful that the Fei-Ranis model came along and refined it. But the core message stayed the same. This massive structural shift, moving people from the farm to the factory, isn't just a good idea, it is the essential condition for a country to develop. So after that whirlwind tour, what's the big takeaway? It might seem like a giant clash of competing ideas, right? But maybe the best way to think about all these theories isn't about which one is right and which is wrong. It's better to see them as different tools in an economist's toolkit. So think of it this way. Each theory gives you a different lens to see the world. If you put on the classical lens, you're forced to focus on the fundamental ingredients. Switch to the Schumpeterian lens, and suddenly you're looking for the innovators and disruptors. The Marxist lens makes you analyze the power dynamics and conflicts, and the structuralist lens helps you see those massive, society-changing shifts from one sector to another. They all show you something different. And that brings us to the final question, really a question for you. When you look at the economy today, the tech giants, the debates over inequality, the rise of new economic powers, which one of these lenses helps you make sense of what you're seeing? The answer might depend on what you're looking at, but just knowing which questions to ask, well, that's half the battle. Thanks for joining me.